Hey, it's the Cycle World Podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer. I'm the editor-in-chief, and I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. I will tell you the topic shortly. I want to ask you to join us on Patreon. There's a link in the description. We are doing extra episodes and extra content. We've been delighted and really enjoy spending our time with you. We want to do more and extra content. It's a small fee to subscribe and get a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and then a couple additional podcasts per week on different topics, some short form stuff. There's one that we have recently recorded based on an email chain that Kevin and I shared a number of years ago. It was called The Excellence of Butter. Now, it's motorsports related. Don't get me wrong. We'll always bring it back. I think we'll always bring it back. But we plan like a video shop tour of Kevin's space, and there'll be Q&As at some point in the future. Join us on Patreon if you really like it. Share this podcast with a friend. We're going to keep doing this every Wednesday on YouTube and Spotify. So suffer the commercials. Everything will be available on Patreon without commercials. So that will be one benefit of having call it a direct relationship with us. And we appreciate anybody who joins us there. And we certainly enjoy you here. So now, let us begin, Kevin. I will say, motorcycle suspension. In the beginning at the rear, we're going to talk about rear suspension. In the beginning, it was all arm, no swing.
Yeah.
We had sprung saddles. Those were, useful. And American bikes had huge cross-section tires.
Yes.
And that was also useful. As an owner of a rigid motorcycle from the 30s at one time, and a Swingarm, the first Swingarm motorcycle of Velocet in 1954 for the 500cc bike. I have to say, I could understand the mistrust of a Swingarm at that time because they were not fully baked, and a rigid on a smooth road felt fantastic, very positive and wonderful.
Nothing steers like a rigid.
Yep, it's true. Your steering head is so beautifully connected to the rear axle. There's no weave, wobble. When you look at early swing arms, it's just, gosh, we'll get to it, but I'm going to kick it to Kevin and let him tell us what's up.
Okay. Well, there were some bikes built before World War I with swing arms, because that was the period of trying everything. So many people building things, so many different ideas. It takes time for design to settle on something that is workable, affordable, reliable. So I think Indian had a swing arm as an option around 1912. But all attempts to make swing arm bikes in those early days met with derision. Nothing steers like a rigid, said the experienced people, for the reasons that Mark gave, that the frame goes straight from the steering head back down to the axle holders. So people just made do with that. And the idea of large section tires, it did spread to Europe as well. There were 3 and 3.5 inch section rears in use. And there was some, it made the sharp points of the bumps less able to puncture your composure. So things went along like this. And then in 1935 came a sudden slap, which was Goodsey built a swing arm version and a triangulated swing arm version of their wide angle V-twin, 120 degrees between cylinders, and won the senior TT, or I should say Stanley Woods won the senior TT on this bike. And it wasn't a sweeping victory. It wasn't a resounding triumph for the new concept. Norton was always there. They were close. It has been claimed that Goodsey knowingly deceived them as to their intentions to when to make a fuel stop. But after the race, Norton's race manager, Joe Craig, said, "I believe Stan Woods could not have made those lap times on a rigid bike." Now that was quite a thing at the time, because motorcycle design was well accepted as it was, and news people, interviewers from the British comics, would ask questions like, "Do you think that motorcycles have now reached the limits of human ability?" This is when they were averaging 60 miles an hour around the Isle of Man course of 37 and 2/3 miles. And now the lap record is over 130 miles per hour, more than twice as much. So Norton immediately adopted sliding pillar. I like to call it sticking pillar, because you imagine these bearings sliding on these two columns that are in an apparatus that is basically welded to the remnants of a rigid frame. And is it all perfectly aligned as the thing slides up and down, or does it kind of work its way up and down? But at the same time, Phil Vincent, who occupied his school days drawing pictures of motorcycles and his ideas about them, had bought the failed company of Howard R. Davies, the HRD of Vincent HRD, which was the company name for a while. And he didn't buy much besides the name and some frame fittings. So had to make up the whole thing. And by 1935, they had built a motorcycle that finished 7th in the same race that Stan Woods won, with Phil Vincent's idea of a triangulated swing arm rear suspension. So the same idea maturing in two places simultaneously. And this is so often the nature of innovation. Linus Pauling was within weeks of coming up with the structure description of DNA as the double helix. But it was another team that got there first, because when you have a lot of people working on a problem, stymied by the lack of a solution and spending a lot of time thinking about it, often the solutions will be similar. So that was the end of Nothing Steers Like a Rigid, because suddenly here is Joe Craig saying, "I don't believe old Stan could have made those lap times on a rigid bike." So big change. Now, we have to sort of leap from this point. World War II, the military is very conservative. They want single-cylinder flatheads with rigid frames because that's what they'd always had. So that's what they built for them. The war ends. Motorbike racing resumes. Norton is trying to make its ages old by this time, but wonderfully developed single-cylinder 500 double overhead cam, 2-valve engine. Win races. It continues successful in the TT. But Gilera and in 1950, MV are fielding 4-cylinder bikes, which made their RPM not by super refined airflow and combustion, but by raw RPM. Do the power producing cycle more times per minute. So Norton had a problem. Their garden gate frame was a single plane frame. There was excessive stress on the down tube, which on occasion would just click break off. One writer called it broke like a carrot. If you've ever broken a carrot, it makes a very decisive sound. And so Norton is looking high and low for a solution. And they were aware or were made aware that two brothers up in Northern Ireland, Rex and Chromie McCandless, had come up with something. They were putting swing-arm rear suspensions on people's motorcycles as a update. And they were working intensively developing their own motorcycle chassis with a Triumph twin engine in it, with some radical features. Twin loop frame, enclosing quite a lot of volume. A twin loop frame is a wonderful thing to attach a swing arm to because the swing arm fits between the loops at the back where they're descending to curl forward under the engine. And you have reinforced areas there. The swing arm fits in between. You slip the bolt through.
It's gripped out wide.
Yes,
wide. It's a lot
instead of a tube, the seat tube sticking up like this with the swing arm attached to it going.
Yeah, vestigial sweet seat tube because we weren't using them, but I hate to say Velocette, but the swinging arm 500 MSS and every Velocette after that had a vertical tube, and the swing arm's attached to that in a lug, and then that pipe is unsupported out here. And to add entertainment to that, so the pivot's there, and on the pivoting tube, the two arms for the swing arm are clamped.
Not welded.
Pinch bolts.
Clamped.
Not welded. They're slid on. So you better make sure they're lined up pretty good and everything's nice. But yeah, and a Velocette for that era especially is a pretty decent handling bike, but we'd have a lot better.
Let us compare the rubber in tires with the rubber used in hard rubber combs. Because tire grip and the ability of the suspension to ride up and down over the undulations in the pavement generates the forces that the frame has to handle. And those forces were weak and flabby at the time. So they get their prototype running really well, testing daily on the public highways of Northern Ireland. And this is a wonderful story because this is not a drawing board story. This is not a computer or AI story. This is two guys doing it. And Rex worked at Shorts Aviation up there, and he had learned about low temperature silver brazing, which allows you to join steel tubes without heating them to red temperature and therefore destroying their heat treat. So this was one of the things that he had made himself familiar with. He's a man who left school at the age of 13 because he wanted to do things. He didn't want to sit there waiting for other people to learn to spell. Perhaps you've had similar experiences. In any case, Rex McCandless is summoned to Bracebridge Street, and he agrees to build Norton a chassis. He builds it. The motorcycle, by the way, he had to bring his whole brazing setup because there was no welding equipment at Norton. No welding equipment in the factory because this was the days of tube and lug. The lugs are cast iron or steel, and the tubes are slid into holes machined in these lugs with a sort of a lick of brazing spelter. The whole thing goes into an oven. The brazing spelter melts and joins everything together. There's your frame.
The videos of the production of that, there was a Triumph factory. I think it was the Triumph factory video where they put the lug in. It's big hammers. This guy wearing a leather apron, and he's sticking it into. Yeah, he's sticking it into a forge, and these pumping away, and it's probably a coal forge, and it's just there, and he just jams the thing in there, melts that stuff, goes all the way around the frame, builds the frame, and then hits it with a giant hammer to straighten it out before he sends it down the line. It's nice. Look that up. It's out there somewhere.
This
Triumph
was
Factory, 1950s.
this was to be named the featherbed frame because riding it in comparison with the previous frame was like lying on a feather bed. This silver brazed chassis was built up into a motorcycle, and Norton tested it every which way. They ran it in the Isle of Man. They found there that it could pass another rider on the garden gate frame on the outside, accelerating. I think someone must have written that down soberly on a pad.
Got to get one of those.
Yes, sir. Then they tested at the Motor Industries Research Association, MIRA, test track in England. And after that, they tested at Molerie, which was a speed bowl outside of Paris. Thorough testing. Like Davy Crockett said, first, be sure you're right. Then go ahead. So they run this thing. Jeff Duke is the rider. What could be better? And it was a huge success. They would have won the 500 World Championship in 1950 had they not had tire failures caused by throwing the tread off the tire, chunking. And so in 1951, with a different brand of tire on their bicycle, they defeated Gilera and MV 4-cylinder bikes with the good old Norton single. And this was a motorcycle with a telescopic fork up front, a swing arm in the back, twin loop frame, and hydraulic damping all around. No more squeaking, stick, slip, scissors type friction dampers with a big wing nut to adjust the damping. So,
well, that description you made of the twin loop frame and all that is the recipe we used racing wise until the 80s, really.
Many years. This was it. This was the new synthesis. All these ideas had been tried before, but when I looked at the drawings, I looked at photographs, I could see that the engine had been moved forward like 3 inches, and the rider nearly the same. So no wonder it could accelerate around the outside of the garden gate motorcycle. Anyway, of course, it couldn't last. The Norton just didn't have the power to keep up. Once Gilera and MV started, and this was the term they used, Nortonizing their chassis. Try to imagine a 500cc 4-cylinder motorcycle with 32 millimeter fork tubes. If they're bent, you could probably straighten them over your knee, do you think?
I'd try.
Yeah, or at least banging them into a tree. That's sure to work. It was a traditional remedy for on-the-road repair. So,
slam them in a door.
Yes, inertial truing. So what happens now is that the swing arm is widely adopted because there's no longer any reason to consider the alternatives. Sticking pillar. I think there was a system where they terminated the rigid frame early and put little 6-inch long swing arm on there.
The Triumph sprung hub is legendary.
Spring hub. Oh, yes. Now, just one last bolt here. Suddenly, the thing explodes in your face.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's the imprint of springs on your eyes and in your mouth and so forth.
Yeah, my friend Bill Getty, he's a JRC engineer, and he does British parts and stuff. He's been working on British bikes his whole life. Big enthusiast and a crazy rider and lots of great adventures. And he's taken apart everything. He can recognize across the room the body of a British generator skittering across his shop and say, "Oh, wait, we got to get that. That's a really rare XYZ off a 1953 one-year aerial mag dyno setup or something." It's just remarkable. And he says, if you ever get a sprung hub, don't take it apart.
Yep. That is what they say.
So the sprung hub is a giant hub, and it has springs inside. So they just slid this thing into the rigid Triumphs of the day, sort of 1950-ish.
It had guide shoes inside of it.
Yeah. And it had a little arc that it would run through and a lot of springs holding it. And it did, it's got a feel. Seemed to work sort of okay, half measure. I think of the rigid as a triangulation that I would want to extend. That's my dog. The triangulation is something I would want to extend to a swing arm.
Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yep. Hey. Yeah. Come. Sorry, folks. It's my dog. I know people have requested. Come here. Oh, no, you don't know. Okay. So, anyways, just that triangulation of the rigid, I think is. I wish we'd extended that sort of the way that Vincent did. What if we had done that from the beginning for everything?
Yes. Well, something else was easier to do and worked just as well in general. Certainly, as soon as the featherbed came along, alternatives were discouraged. Anyway, this era of 3 pieces of pipe went on for years because it was enough. Tires had cotton carcass for right through the 50s, and then rayon and nylon and other alternatives were adopted, made the tires a little more durable, and butadiene styrene rubber, synthetic rubber, was beginning to be adopted in the late 50s. And I remember the Avon tire made with cling rubber, I think. And everybody had this improved form of rubber on tires by the early 60s. So forces on the suspension were on the increase, but not very rapidly. So along comes Suzuki with an interesting idea. Their 50cc racer needed to have its weight reduced essentially to 0 because it only had 14.5 horsepower. So they made the frame and the swing arm out of aluminum. What a novelty. Now, this resulted in Hugh Anderson characterizing it as this: there was quite a difference in characteristic between the aluminum and the steel frames. On the fast corners, the aluminum frame was quite good, but on the slower ones, it was quite rigid. And he goes on to say, basically, that the flexibility of the steel frame was an asset in slower corners and the stiffness of the aluminum in fast corners. Well, steel is 3 times stiffer than aluminum. That is, its inherent spring constant, Young's modulus. How can the weak material produce a stiffer frame? And of course, today you hear these same things about bicycle frames. Oh, aluminum is way too stiff for me, or what have you. Well, it turns out that for a constant wall thickness, if you increase as you increase the diameter of the tubing, the stiffness of the tubing, that is resistance to bending, I should say, increases as the 4th power. So this means that if you increase the diameter by 10%, you're going to end up with 3 or more times the rigidity, the stiffness, pardon me. So I think they were simply saying, well, we can use larger aluminum tubing to compensate for the fact that it isn't as stiff as steel. And they were very successful in doing that. I think they also put aluminum swing arms on their 125 V4, which at one point was making 40 odd horsepower. 40 odd horsepower from a 125 is fairly good going, especially for the mid to late 60s, which is now 60 years ago. So Yamaha decided, okay, the round tube is a problem because if we want to make it stiffer when we make the diameter bigger, then the whole thing becomes wider. The shocks have to be mounted out farther. Why don't we make the swing arm beams out of rectangular tubing, taller and narrower? So they did. And I think it was 63. They put a rectangular swing arm on their RD56, which Phil Reed then in 64 and 65 took to 250 World Championships. And that chassis came to the U.S. in 1969 on the TD2 and TR2 production road racers, 2 strokes, both of them, with that rectangular tube swing arm. Now, I remember seeing those swing arms dented by, I don't know what, stones kicked up by the front tire. I can't say, but there wasn't a lot of thickness in those tubes. And Don Vesco and others in California began to make rectangular tube swing arms. And there was a favorite size, I think about 2 inches high by an inch wide, that most people were using. I think Vesco's were rather less tall. He was going for low weight. Others were going for high stiffness. And there was a lot of discussion of swing arms. And around 1970, handling problems with 250s and 350s seemed to smooth out with a longer swing arm. And in 1971, this phenomenon peaked. Just put a longer swing arm on it. It's going to be great. And when Kelk or others went to Japan to test ride the TZ750A, which many people call TZ700, it weaved on the straightaway at the test track where they ran. And Kel said, extend the swing arm 3 inches. So it was done. And probably they had given it Agostini's favorite swing or wheelbase of 53.5 inches. And they added 3 inches to that. So that was working. So at this point, Harry Hunt threw his hat in the ring, and he made a swing arm that was seen from the side. Here's the pivot, and here's the axle holder. And from the pivot, it filled completely the space between the space below the drive chain. So it was very tall beam. And then it tapered to the axle holders. This was, I think, the high point of the I would call simple swing arm. And I designed one like that for my riders, TZ750, and the welder putting it together laughed at it. He held up a piece of the sheet metal and flopped it back and forth. It was bending. He said, "This can't work. Please weld it together, then we'll see." And of course, not only was it massively stiff, but it cracked from lateral forces.
Yeah, isn't that how it ends up? But we got to try it.
Yep.
That's the thing about sheet metal, though, is boxing it in. You get something. You get a structure with dimension. You take a flat piece of sheet metal and you make it into a bowl, make it a dome, put any crown in it. It's quite rigid.
Yes, indeed.
That's why body panels are typically curved.
And that's
on your
why
car.
Phil Vincent was told, dish all sections. When he was designing when he and Phil Irving were designing the post-war twin. Dish all sections. Shape brings stiffness. The cardboard box is unimpressive until you close the flaps and tape it. And then it becomes quite rigid. Anyway, here comes 1972. The AMA had made a new rule effective 1970 that said no more special deal for flatheads, no more limitations on how many gearbox speeds you can have. Everyone gets 750 cc's, 2-stroke, 4-stroke, flathead, whatever you like. And in 1972, here comes Kawasaki with their 90 horsepower H2R and Suzuki with their TR750 100 horsepower liquid cooled triple, aka what was it now that they called it?
With Water Buffalo?
Water Buffalo, that was it. Because of the Buffalo part of it, of course, referred to the handling. And there were so many theories about that. Well, if we just put a piece of tubing in here, or
well, I rode one of those 2-stroke street machines that we call a Water Buffalo also, and it was a really nice motorcycle. Actually, it turned out to be very nicely tuned, and it was a very tractable engine, and it was quiet. You know, the rotary was insanity by comparison.
But the people in the showroom couldn't understand what it was for.
Yeah,
it had no legend.
Did not.
If you create a huge monster and it has no legend, it's just a statue. There's got to be a story. We humans want the story. So
work for the Hayabusa.
Yeah. These motorcycles brought 100 horsepower to road racing for the first time. They could exert such force through the swing arm that no tire could be found for those motorcycles. So in 72 and 73, the Daytona 200 was won by a little Yamaha 350 twin, which was easy on the rider, easy on tires. The rider went to the party after the race and not to the therapy clinic. Now, along comes a series of changes to motorcycles, which greatly affected their grip and the way people rode them. From motocross came long travel suspension. Why would you want to increase the travel? So that you have to get on your motocross bike by standing on a 5-gallon pail? Probably not. The real reason is that the energy absorption capability of suspension is proportional to travel squared. So the old-time bikes, which since 1950, since the featherbed, switched everything to hydraulic damping, 3 inches of travel. All those wonderful Girling shocks that British riders brought to Italian race teams in their luggage because they didn't trust any other form of suspension. I think those people had to contain themselves because prolonged vibration increases the urge to pee. So this long travel suspension to this was added slick tires. First long travel, I was told by Mike Baldwin, said on those old bikes with the short travel stuff, when you rode out of the Daytona infield at turn 5 onto the banking, there was a pronounced thump. And there was nothing you could do about that. So that was a good place to upshift because suspension upsets are made smaller by not having the power on. But he said, as soon as we got the long travel stuff, you could just gas it through there. So the ability to gas it through rough sections meant more thumping and twisting and banging passing through the swing arm. So this was a time when something more was needed, and everyone was recognizing it. The grip of slick tires was just tremendous. First of all, the tread was self-bracing. It didn't have little weakening grooves cut in it to make the tread flex from side to side, and the tread blocks tip so that their surface in contact decreased.
Oh, Kevin, the first time I tried slick tires, I could not believe it, especially the front.
Yeah.
Turning in the smoothness and the feedback and the positivity. It was amazing. It really was. So yeah, every time you make a void in the tread, even that fancy stuff that you get, all these DOT race tires with the notional water sipes on them, the little, like one every 8 inches.
I think it looks like Arabic writing. Yeah.
A little squiggle in
Yes,
the
a little
tread.
squiggle.
I mean, they're really close to slicks, but they're not slicks.
So people began to add some bracing to swing arms in a kind of, gosh, I wonder if it would be better, if it were stiffer. So either on the top or the bottom of the swing arm, they'd glue on, weld, tubular braces, the purpose of which was to prevent the swing arm beams from doing this.
Yeah.
And the tire from tilting from side to side, because from holding a bicycle wheel and spinning it, that if you try to yank it, it does something that is just completely unpredictable until you get used to it. And motorcycles can tie themselves in knots from those forces. So here comes Superbike. AMA first called it heavyweight production because there were so many people racing these new 1000cc, 903cc four strokes that the AMA said, well, we've got to make a class for that because that's coming. So they did that, and that became Superbike. And these were motorcycles that were powered by engines that were twice as powerful as a Triumph Bonneville in a chassis whose technology level was identical with that of a 60s Bonneville. And when Japanese engineers were asked why they had done this, they said, oh, in US, 60 mile per hour speed limit. Were you ever young? Did you ever break a rule? Have you heard of breaking rules? Anyway, they quickly learned that those big motorcycles needed a lot of help. Welding in of all kinds of braces and gussets and pieces of plate. All the tubes going up to the steering head were sheeted in to make a stiff box out of it. And the AMA, in a rare departure from their usual tight-lipped conservatism, said, swing arm and fork and suspension damping parts may be altered or replaced. And a loud rattle from the dumpster as all those parts fell in after flying across
it recalls
the shop.
it recalls the classic R90S, the Butler and Smith bike, with it was a twin shock motorcycle from the factory and suddenly sprang monoshock.
Yes, because Udo said we relocated one of the shocks to a shelf in the shop. So it's perfectly legal.
Good stuff.
So this first era of Superbike was very attention-getting because these bikes all wobbled and weaved, and the riders sat up, and you could see their grim efforts to assert control over 400-plus pounds of hurtling iron and aluminum. Well, that era came to an end after 1982 when the displacement was changed to 750. Second era superbikes were given some of the knowledge, some of the results of the Big Four experience in motorcycle road racing, Grand Prix racing specifically. Oh, we have to do chassis differently. We need improved fork. We need better swing arm. And the AMA saying altered or replaced, modified or replaced, people just started welding stuff onto swing arms like crazy. And no more 3 pieces of pipe. It became the standard thing for all race bikes to have a tower built either on the top or on the bottom of the swing arm, whose purpose was to prevent this. Let your swing arm do the walking? No way. So they produced this second generation of sports motorcycles to be raceable as delivered. And the result was production racing classes of a new and powerful, irresistible kind, super sport. Because it was estimated at that time that the modifications permitted would cost you no more than $2,500. And this was at a time when the price of a TZ250, which used to be the first step into professional road racing, was sailing past 20 grand. And you could buy a 600 Super Sport for not much more than that, 2,500.
Yeah. I was, just as a note on the production racer front, I was looking at race results circa 74 from Laguna Seca. We have a really nice picture of Yvon Duhamel racing his number 17 there. But I went back to the results. This is in Cycle World, an old issue of Cycle World, November 74, as I recall. And boy, the results are stacked with Yamahas. It's just every class. And there's Duhamel.
Yeah.
Behind Ken Roberts, learning a heartbeat away from becoming one of the greatest road racers, practicing the craft at the time, said the story.
So
and he was.
These sport bikes changed the attitude of American riders. The Honda Interceptor 750 sold 1,200 bikes in the twinkling of an eye. I think that's, one bike per dealer? Maybe slightly more than that. But at any rate, handling had never been an advertisable or even a detectable quality in terms of marketing. And
its
all that
opposite
you would
was detectable.
Yes, all you could see was, what's the top speed, man? What's the quarter mile time, man? And so our magazines delivered that information. And so these redesigned motorcycles had improved chassis. They were stiffer. Same thing was happening in MotoGP, 500 GP as it was then. That when a rider began to get on the gas to come off a corner, a more flexible motorcycle would go through this tremendous cycle of oscillation and jumping sideways as the tire lost, as it slipped and gripped and slipped yet again. And for a time, making the chassis stiffer shortened the recovery period. Yes, the tire still slipped and gripped. Yes, there were still oscillations, but now they were calmed somewhat. But the stiffness became a god, and we threw ourselves on our faces and worshipped it. It was a false god. In 1993, After practice at the post-practice press conference, Wayne Rainey said, "We have chatter, we have hop, and we have skating. We don't know what to do about it." Now, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of the bicycle, lateral flexibility in a two-wheeler going through a curve has functioned as a form of suspension. So instead of just launching yourself from one undulation to the crest of another, there was some chance that the tires would follow the contour and remain gripping. And people thought this through. And by 93, there had been some people who had said, what if we just cut that cross member out? Let's try it. We can always weld it back, right? And sometimes it was better. Other times it was a disaster. So people didn't establish lack of flexibility, a lack of stiffness as a new God. They were just confused because the results weren't consistent. Well, then came this tremendous period of experimentation, and all sorts of things were being tried in hopes that one of them might work. In the midst of all of this, here comes Honda with RC30 in 1987 with a single-sided swing arm. This was, I think, the first production, over-the-counter bike with a single-sided swing arm. The idea had come from Honda's association with Elf, a French fuel company that had done a bunch of experimental chassis with alternative forms of suspension and structure. Elf were the ones, for example, who came up with the idea of putting the fuel under the engine instead of on top of it. At this point, the single-sided swing arm was not fully mature. A conversation that I had with American Honda racing manager Gary Mathers, he told me the place to go at Willow Springs, which is used by the manufacturers for testing all sorts of stuff. Go up there and sit when we have a test day and look at the RC30 going through there, and you will see stress asymmetry. Because if you've got one beam holding with an axle sticking out of it, fairly hefty axle, and there's nothing on this side, then there are increased degrees of freedom. The axle can do this, so that all sorts of crazy stuff was going on at the time. Well, people loved the single-sided swing arm because it was so different, and it looked
we loved it. We had to have it.
Yeah, it looked like Formula One car parts.
Well, I bought a VFR 750 Express. There's no way I could have bought an RC30. You wanted an RC30, but then they made the VFR 750, and it had gear-driven cams and had a single-sided swing arm, and that was the sliver of the true cross that I could afford, and that's the new bike that I bought in 1995. I've got to have it,
Got to.
Yep.
So, of course, every innovation has a learning curve. Ducati, let's say Massimo Tamburini, the great and intuitive designer, adopted a single-sided swing arm for the 916, and it was as if he had conferred immortality upon all who looked upon this motorcycle. They wanted it. They wanted the single-sided swing arm, and they continued to want it. And I would make a parallel with the Porsche 911, which Porsche have repeatedly tried to discontinue because it has the engine sticking out the back of it, as if someone said, those modified Model Ts they used to have at the fair, when the guy would gas it up, the front wheels would come up, And the kids inside would squeal with delight. Let's build a car like that. We'll make the engine stick out the back. People loved that car, and they continue to love it. So this must simply be accepted. And poor, poor old Pierre Terblanche with his, what was the model that he made?
Oh, the 999.
Yes, the 999. He deviated from the true path. He
Well,
made
there was
it.
a lot. Yeah, there was a tremendous deviation. He was very much into. He's like a cerebral designer. I mean, he did. He's credited with the Super Mono, and he did some interesting stuff. He did the Halewood. Halewood.
Yep.
People really liked that Halewood quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't comfortable, but who cares? It looked fantastic. And then the 999, it was very cerebral, and the Ducati thing is emotional. It's very
Exactly.
the
Yes.
Tamburini stuff had organic shapes, and it was. I mean, he kind of had said, "Yeah, the NR 750 was part of my inspirational process, and why wouldn't it be?" The oval piston and single sided swing arm there, and then along comes Pierre, and he wants to make a rational. I had a long conversation with him. He wants to make a rational design, and he's like, "Well, why don't we use enclosed chains? Because enclosed chains, the chains last virtually forever."
Yep.
He says, "People just don't like it." And he was
Yes.
mad, like he was mad. Like, why can't they understand? Why can't they understand? And it's like, well,
Get them by the
rock and roll.
lapels and give them a good shaking. Then they'll
Well,
believe.
it's like rock and roll, It's not rational.
You like what you
We're
like.
we're not using good grammar. It's the who, it's not the whom. We pound it out, right? Like it just shreds. And so the 999 comes along, and we had a conversation about it, and I said, well, the single-sided swing arm, I mean, it's kind of a trademark. And he's like, yeah, but it doesn't work. I mean, tell me why it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We tested it with a twin fork swing arm, and the lap times were faster. We had to use it. We had to use a twin arm. And Ducati is now using a twin arm. They are. I mean, now it's okay. Back then it wasn't okay. And then I ran into Bart, who was Bart Johansson Grosbeek, I think it is. He was a designer at Ducati at that time, and he was part of the team that did the 1098, which I found out recently sitting at dinner with him in Germany last year. I said, I always took the 1098 as like a conservative apology to the Ducatisti to come back. It was just nice. It wasn't flamboyant, but it had what we wanted, and you got the single-sided swing arm. He's like, absolutely was.
Yes.
Like we got to be cool. We got to kiss and make up. And that's what they came back with, single-sided. They're like, make it work.
Well, when they decided that you could have too much stiffness, they wanted to know naturally which stiffness: bending stiffness, torsional stiffness, lateral stiffness. They quickly decided lateral stiffness, and prototypes were built to allow these variables to be explored. And lateral stiffness reduced, or I should say relaxed lateral stiffness, became a tool. That's still being used, and to my knowledge, there is not an SAE paper that has been given by Honda or any of the others. There used to be lots of SAE papers by Honda, but they studied the daylights out of it, and to the point of maybe occasionally a drive chain running off. That would be quite a lot of lateral flexibility. The whole front of the frame was made into a lateral spring, carrying the steering head and the fork and all those tremendous unsprung weight, but better than a rigid bike, as Casey Stoner discovered when Ducati built that carbon fiber frame. The front end was so stiff that it did not send information to the rider, and as a result, he had to guess how fast he could go into a given corner. He had to remember muscle memory from last lap. Consequently, he began to fall, and his position in the world championship began to fall. And all sorts of theories were advanced. Oh, he had some kind of fatigue syndrome and various problems and so forth. But when Honda said, "Get on our motorcycle," just as he had done with Ducati in 2007, he won 10 races and the championship. And Colin Edwards told me the story of riding the RC51 when Honda first realized that the Ducati was much more flexible laterally. And they developed a kit of parts. It had a little booklet came with it. It said first step, second step. And he said, with every step, I could push the bike harder and lap a little bit quicker before it started to chatter. And finally, he said they had taken out at least one engine bolt and softened up things, allowing lateral movement by means of spacers and shims, such that he could break Bayless and win the championship. And he watched that whole thing happen step by step as they went through the little booklet until the motorcycle had the lateral flexibility to get through corners faster. Now, at an earlier time when I'd spoken to Colin about the Ducati, I'd said, "Thing really wallows in the corners." Yeah, he said, it wallows, but it digs in and goes around the corner. So the problem was to make the Honda dig in, and they did that. So it's spread to MotoGP. I remember at one point when I managed to finagle my way or be invited into one of the boxes on pit lane, I got a measurement. The lateral thickness of the beams, which are tremendously high at the front and tapering down to the axle holders, 32 millimeters. The next time I had the opportunity, 25 millimeters. Finally, they had them flexing enough to crack, like my experience with my built-up sheet metal swing arm. And then they said, well, let's try carbon fiber. Carbon fiber can flex a lot without cracking. So that's where we are.
Yeah, it's not compressed sand. That's the old the old Britain quote. You know, when you start working with directional materials, you start to look at metals like compressed sand.
Really tightly packed, so it's
tightly
got
packed
some
sand.
strength. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I was looking at a photograph of a Honda MotoGP bike upper triple clamp, and it's like a blade.
Yep.
And the engine mounts, anytime you see a photo of under the skin, if you get that rare photo of a body off on a MotoGP bike, or when
Well, it's
they
just
crash,
thin sheet metal. Yeah.
just little thin sheet metal holding this, 300 horsepower engine. And I mean, here I am riding modified street bikes, or I would say the fastest, most recent superbike-like thing I've ridden is an Alpha Racing. That's BMW's kind of performance house. They do all the preparation for super bikes, and you can buy an Alpha Racing BMW M1000 RR prepared for like stock 1000. If you want to go race Moto America stock 1000, call Alpha. So I rode Nate Kern's version of this bike, and it was insane. The steering was insane. The brakes were insane. The power was insane. The electronics were out of this world. And he had loaded his bike, Alpha, and this was at Barber at the end of the 24 season for Moto America. And when I was racing, they loaded that bike with the program from Jason Uribe's stock 1000 bike. And so all the electronics were like ultra as good as they could be in that sphere. And it was the loads were mind blowing. I spent the entire week racing a 72 BMW with 70 horsepower, which was super fun, and it feels as fast as can be, and it handled quite well for what it was. but it's a very human. Uh, it's like what you said about the Isle of Man. Have humans reached the limit? 60-mile-an-hour lap
Yes.
time, and I'm like breaking 120. I'm going 120 miles an hour, which you could do in about 3 seconds on an
Yeah.
M1000. So, but the loads are incredible, and I can't imagine what riders are going through. I mean, you can see it you can see it in how their bodies are, and you can see it in what they're doing on the bikes and how far they're leaning and how their heads are this high off the tarmac as their shoulders are flat on the ground.
And they're
It's
wearing
just
protectors
remarkable.
on the elbow.
Yeah, elbows and shoulders. You're
Yeah.
dragging shoulders.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's
Well,
just,
Martine started that shoulder thing. Well, he may
yeah,
not have, but he certainly got people talking about it.
yeah. But it all through this conversation, it reminded me of the progression of racing and some of the stories that you have told. So, oh, great. We have slick tires, and now we've made the chassis stiff enough for that slick tire.
Mhm.
But the progression just goes away. If only we would do the same lap times, everything would be fine, right? you know, that's the beautiful progression of racing. That's why it's wonderful, because you just keep smashing forward, and one problem gets solved, and it bears the next one
It
that you didn't even
exposes the
know.
next one. Yes.
Yeah, you didn't even know that it was going to be a problem, and there it is.
We went to disc brakes and then to slick tires, and suddenly steering heads weren't stiff enough. They were tending to tuck under. Fork tubes weren't big enough. 35, 37, 39. Now 50.
50.
So that is the result of having to transmit the load of slick tire plus disc brakes to stop a 400-pound thing. Well, 500 and something with the rider and fuel at 1.4 Gs. There was a rumor in 1976, and I never asked him about this, that Gary Nixon had bent a set of fork tubes while braking at Loudon. I'd like to know if there was any substance to that.
Oh, there's the lore about Freddie Spencer bending the handlebars on his Honda Superbike.
Yes, and Ben Spies on a MotoGP bike. These fellows don't go to the gym because they're physical culture enthusiasts. They go because it enables them to survive the conditions in which they work. So it's
Well,
like like the Swingarm, which has had to increase its ability to transmit force with every change, tires, brakes, etc. The humans have to have something done for them, and that something in the current moment is electronic rider aids.
yeah,
130 miles per hour at the island.
I was at Worlds. Yeah, I rode around the island on a Honda cross tour thing. One of their V4 sort of street adventure bikes, and just as the course was closing, riding around, I was led by Freddie Dew, who's the son of David Dew, who does the press for the TT. And he says, "Okay, we're going to ride the course as they close it." I'm like, "Great!" So we got some Hondas out of some, like European Honda stuff out of some garage down in Douglas, and went down and got it and hauled away, and we were riding the course, and it was I was going at 75, 85 miles an hour, and I'm thinking, like, how do you set a bike up for this? Because it was just bumpy in a section where I have no idea how fast you'd be going, probably like 175, something like that. Just a big, long, straight piece of road. It was shocking. I can't imagine what those guys are doing and going through, and the repeatability that they demonstrate. I was thinking about the swing arm and an instance at Laguna Seca. It was Aaron Yates and Doug Chandler, Muzzy Kawasaki, and it was a press conference, and both those guys were in it, and we were asking questions. And I had gone to Muzzy's tent, the big rig. And I was looking at the bikes, and Doug Chandler's bike had a beautiful built up swing arm, a lot of vertical section, narrow sides. I mean, it was a piece of art. And I looked at Aaron Yates's bike and I was like, huh, street bike, like very, very basic. And so I didn't make note of that really in the question, but I just asked Doug, I'm like, hey, that swing arm, can you tell me a little bit about that swing arm? And Aaron Yates is like, and Doug's like, oh, well, we got a kid arm and, we're just trying something out, as you always say. And then Aaron Yates is over there and he leans into the mic. He says, I would like to point out that I do not have that swing arm.
Wonderful.
So if you don't think it's important, it is. Another swing arm story is talking to someone who was inside the Kawasaki race team. And at the time, we were well past the prototype stage where everything was custom and made of titanium and all that. But he said anymore, if there's a piece of a motocross bike that you want to, that you would like to claim, that you'd like to get your hands on, it's the swing arm. He said so much work goes into the swing arm of these guys at the pro level to really make them do what they need them to do and to make them have the feel and the traction and lateral stiffness and all that stuff. It's great. It's nice that the whole thing is, as we always observe, the whole thing is an interactive system. Everything relies on everything else, and you change one thing and you can have cascades of problems that you never foresaw, or solutions, or that one thing becomes the solution, like you were talking about in another podcast. Well, we're just going to put a longer swing arm on it, but then, well, wait a minute, I can't get off. It's spinning. Why? What is this? We're not getting, that was the weight transfer podcast. And sometimes it is a solution. Sometimes that one thing is a solution. If you want to race a Yamaha XS650 and you want to use a stock frame, you use the later chassis and you get a longer swing arm. And it tends to balance it out. It works. It is that sort of one solution. But at the level of race bikes or MotoGP at this point, imagine someone suggesting, well, let's put a 1 inch longer swing arm on your bike there, Valentino, or whatever, maybe.
What year was it that Cycle World ran that Richard Stanboli built Yamaha in the 200? And you had to change the swing arm to a stock one at the last moment.
Well, that would have been circa 2000-ish. It might have been just before I got on. Might have been just after, but I remember we were racing the stock Yamaha in Super Sport. There was one we were racing a stock Yamaha in Super Sport, and we did everything stock, like it had turn signals. And then the art department made a license plate that looked like a California plate that read Stalker. And then the license plate frame said, "What's your excuse?"
Yeah.
So if we passed anybody, that was the message they were going to get.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, because there were 40 or 50 bikes on the grid.
The bike that had to have the standard swing arm put in it at the last moment, weaved for 200 miles, just steady, because it wasn't stiff enough.
We had a 94 that we raced at Laguna Seca that Richard built. And so it probably would have been circa around that time, YZF 750.
Yeah.
Remarkable. Well, that's a swing arm, folks. There's probably more to say. There always is.
Yes, indeed. We're
just
not
as
the fly on the wall, but we do have some stories.
Yeah. And just as performance keeps evolving ahead of us, we keep chasing after it, trying to understand everything that we can. And we appreciate all those people in the paddock who are always digging in and sharing information now and sharing photos, unknowingly sharing crashed bike photos that have in MotoGP sand traps where you can see mass dampers that are hidden under bodywork.
But now have been cracked open like an egg to reveal the contents.
So that's a tip, folks. If you're going to drop your $180 on your MotoGP video subscription, watch it on a big screen and freeze those frames during crashes and look for stuff. Send it to us. Once again, join us every week. Thanks for being here. Check us out on Patreon. The link is in the description. Hope you like that too. And like I said, we're gonna throw some extra content there. I'm going to convince or force Kevin to give us a tour of his shop and show us the U-boat submarine lathe that he got and his welder. Unfortunately, the 4360s are gone, but I have a vintage video that I shot vintage. It's vintage now, Kevin. I shot around 2006 on a grainy old, probably Sony camera with like 8 pixels or something. But I walked
Yes.
around your shop and did a tour. It was when I came out to do the RD motor with you. And I was like, hey, check this out. And I just walked around and showed a few things. And my voice sounds different. My young voice is different than my now voice. I'll call it a now voice.
Yes.
Anyway, see us on Patreon. We'll have some stuff there. In addition, everything without commercials, this podcast included. Thanks for listening.